Sit your $5 ass down before I make change. This thing is bigger than Nino Brown. This is big business. This is the American way.
The run, G. You can never go back the way it was.
I never thought about doing dramatic work in film. I always thought I would be a song and dance guy.
You've seen Wesley Snipes and those guys since all that happened?
Yeah.
I always wanted to, I wanted a part 2 of this New Jack City.
It got derailed because Wesley went and did Demolition Man.
Yeah.
He got $7 million for New Jack City. That was the full budget.
Right.
So he went up and today's price not the same.
Wesley Snipes seems to have finally confirmed the dark secrets of New Jack City. At 62, he's shedding light on what really happened behind the scenes of the iconic film, a movie that wasn't just a hit but a cultural phenomenon. Yet, for over 30 years, shocking truths have remained buried.
You embarrass me, man!
Why did this movie spark riots in theaters across America? What really happened during filming that made cast members uneasy?
And then I got in trouble with Cop Killer.
Okay.
So it derailed the whole That was all Warner Brothers.
New Jack City was more than a crime thriller. It was a mirror reflecting the crack epidemic of the 80s.
Mr. Money, will you please escort Mr. Washington off the court? Take him down the block.
And now, after 3 decades, there might be new revelations confirming the worst fears about the film. When New Jack City hit theaters on March 8, 1991, the excitement was palpable. It was the first black-led gangster film of its kind, an urban crime drama that tackled the harsh realities of the crack epidemic, starring Wesley Snipes as the ruthless drug kingpin Nino Brown. But what should have been a celebratory moment for black cinema quickly spiraled into chaos. Within hours of its premiere, violence erupted at theaters nationwide. What was supposed to be a thought-provoking, cautionary tale became a magnet for real-world crime, leaving 1 person dead, several injured, and more than a dozen arrested. One of the most chilling incidents happened in New York City, where 19-year-old Gabriel Williams was shot and killed in front of a theater screening New Jack City. What started as a simple argument inside the theater quickly escalated into a deadly shootout. More than 100 shots were fired, some from an automatic weapon, as terrified moviegoers ran for their lives. Police later arrested 18-year-old Sean Curry in connection with the murder. The shocking incident forced people to question whether the film was too powerful for its own good. Was it simply reflecting America's drug crisis, or was it fueling the same violence it sought to condemn?
What the f is up is I don't know you, that's what's up. Now, I know you're supposed to be my man's new contact.
If the New York shooting wasn't alarming enough, what happened in Los Angeles sent shockwaves through Hollywood. At a packed theater in Westwood, an estimated 1,500 people showed up for the premiere. But there was a problem. The theater had oversold tickets and began turning people away at the door. What happened next defied all expectations. Denied entry, hundreds of angry moviegoers took to the streets. Frustration boiled over into a full-scale riot. People smashed windows, looted stores, and clashed with law enforcement. Police in riot gear had to intervene, and the chaos lasted for nearly 2.5 hours. By the end of the night, 9 people were arrested, and local businesses were left reeling from the destruction. Hollywood executives, this was a nightmare scenario. Studios had spent decades avoiding movies with predominantly black casts, arguing that they wouldn't be financially successful. New Jack City was supposed to disprove that narrative, proving that a black-led film could dominate the box office. But the violence overshadowed its success, and critics began questioning if the film was too dangerous to exist.
This thing is bigger than Nino Brown. This is big business. This is the American way.
The chaos wasn't limited to New York and Los Angeles. Theaters in Las Vegas also saw trouble. A massive fight broke out during a screening, leading to 15 arrests. Police had to intervene as tensions flared between rival groups in the audience. Sergeant William Reed of the Las Vegas Police Department later reflected on the film's unintended consequences, stating, "It's the type of movie that will draw the gangs to it." This was the same concern voiced by law enforcement officials across the country. The film, inspired by real-life drug lord Nicky Barnes, was meant to serve as a cautionary tale. But instead of deterring crime, it seemed to attract the very people it was meant to warn against. In the aftermath of the nationwide violence, New Jack City became one of the most controversial films of the early 90s. Community leaders, politicians, and even some filmmakers questioned whether the movie was responsible for glorifying gang culture. Critics pointed to the character of Nino Brown, arguing that instead of being a warning, he had become a folk hero, a suave, powerful crime boss who ruled with an iron fist. But the film's director and co-star, Mario Van Peebles, rejected this idea outright. In response to the criticism, he stated, "It's not a heavy gang movie. The movie itself isn't to blame." Wesley Snipes, too, was frustrated with the backlash. He had taken the role of Nino Brown to highlight the destruction drugs had caused in black communities, not to romanticize it. But the reality was unavoidable. The film had struck a nerve, and its impact was too powerful to control. While some blamed the film for inspiring violence, others argued that the violence would have happened with or without it. The early 90s was one of the most dangerous periods in American history. The crack epidemic had ravaged black communities. Gang culture was at an all-time high, and tensions between law enforcement and inner-city residents were already boiling over. New Jack City didn't create those problems. It held a mirror up to them. The film exposed the reality of drug-fueled violence, showing how addiction, crime, and greed could tear communities apart. But because it was so raw and authentic, some audiences couldn't separate fiction from reality. While the film aimed to be a cautionary tale, Nino Brown became something more. A figure so compelling that some saw him as a villain, while others viewed him as an icon. There's a reason why New Jack City felt so real, because of Nino Brown. Played by Wesley Snipes, Nino wasn't just another crime boss. He was charismatic, intelligent, and ruthless, a character that commanded attention every time he was on screen.
You're the one who's guilty. Lawmakers, the politicians, the Colombian drug lords, all you who lobby against making drugs legal.
But while Nino Brown was a fictional character, he was inspired by a very real person, a drug lord whose influence spread far beyond the streets of New York. And that connection to real life would eventually become one of the film's biggest controversies. Nino Brown wasn't just made up for the movie. His story was based in large part on Nicky Barnes, the infamous Harlem drug lord who dominated the heroin trade in the 1970s. Barnes, like Nino, was incredibly wealthy, powerful, and feared. He was one of the most successful drug dealers in American history, running a sophisticated operation that made millions. But what made Barnes especially dangerous wasn't just his criminal empire. It was his public image. He embraced the spotlight, showing off his wealth in fancy suits, flashy cars, and expensive jewelry. In 1977, he even made the cover of the New York Times magazine with the headline, "Mr. Untouchable," a nickname he proudly gave himself. Like Nino Brown, Barnes saw himself as a businessman first, someone who wasn't just selling drugs, but running an empire. And just like Nino, Barnes was eventually taken down, not by his enemies, but by his own people, when they turned on him and helped the government put him away.
Well, they're doing things against me, really. And I have no way to reach out to get to them, and I want to get back at them, really.
The similarities between Barnes and Nino were undeniable, and the public quickly picked up on it. But the problem wasn't just that the character was based on a real person. It was that some people idolized him. One of the biggest criticisms of New Jack City was that, instead of making people fear drug dealers, it made them want to be like them. Nino Brown was supposed to be a cautionary tale, a character who showed what happens when power, greed, and violence consume a person. He was a villain, not a hero. But for many young viewers, he was the coolest guy in the movie. Hip-hop culture, in particular, embraced Nino Brown in ways that even the filmmakers didn't anticipate. Rappers name-dropped him in songs. Fans quoted his lines, and his style, the designer suits, the flashy jewelry, the ruthless attitude, became something to aspire to. Instead of seeing him as the tragic villain, many saw him as a role model. This was a huge problem for community leaders, activists, and even some of the actors involved in the film. Many believed New Jack City had crossed a dangerous line, portraying Nino Brown as too charismatic, too powerful, too cool, making it easy for people to glorify his lifestyle instead of learning from his downfall. Some critics argued that Hollywood had once again created a film that reinforced negative stereotypes about black communities, painting black men as drug dealers and criminals, rather than showing positive role models. No one was more shocked by the reaction than Wesley Snipes himself. In later interviews, Snipes admitted that he never expected Nino Brown to become a cultural icon. To him, Nino was the bad guy, the kind of character that people were supposed to fear, not admire.
Times like these, people want to get high. Real high and real fast. And this is gonna do it.
But he also understood why people were drawn to Nino. The character was smart, powerful, and confident. Qualities that many young men, especially those from tough backgrounds, wanted for themselves. And because Nino was played with such charm and style, it was easy to overlook the fact that he was also a murderer and drug dealer. The unintended impact of New Jack City forced Hollywood to reevaluate how it portrayed black crime bosses in movies. The film had been made to warn people about the dangers of drugs and violence, but instead, it had created a new kind of pop culture legend. Snipes, to this day, has mixed feelings about the film's legacy. While he's proud of its impact, he has said that he never wants to play a character like Nino Brown again, because he knows now how much influence these roles can have on young audiences. But Snipes wasn't the only one dealing with controversy. While he grappled with Nino Brown's legacy, Ice-T found himself at the center of a different kind of backlash. Imagine being a rapper known for anti-establishment lyrics, and then suddenly you're cast as a cop.
Think you slick, you little punk blasphemous dope fiend, bitch!
When Ice-T took on the role of Scotty Appleton, many fans felt betrayed. At the time, Ice-T wasn't just any rapper. He was one of the most outspoken figures in hip-hop, known for his anti-police lyrics and rebellious attitude. His music was filled with stories about street life, gang culture, and police brutality, making him a voice for those who felt unheard. Songs like 6 in the Morning and Colors painted vivid pictures of life in the hood, while his later track Cop Killer would go on to spark one of the biggest censorship battles in music history.
Some police officers across the country now say they're feeling threatened by the lyrics of a rap song.
So, when it was announced that Ice-T would be playing Scotty Appleton, an undercover cop determined to take down Nino Brown, fans were shocked. Some even felt betrayed. How could a man who built his career on calling out law enforcement turn around and play one in a Hollywood movie? The reaction from Ice-T's fan base was immediate. Many people saw it as selling out, abandoning his roots and aligning himself with the very system he had spent years criticizing. For context, hip-hop in the early 90s had a deep distrust of law enforcement. Police brutality, racial profiling, and systemic oppression were everyday realities in black communities, and rap music became a way to push back against those injustices. NWA's F All the Police had already set the tone for hip-hop's stance on law enforcement, and Ice-T himself had built a reputation as one of the genre's most militant voices. So to see him in New Jack City, not as a drug dealer, gangster, or hustler, but as a cop, felt like a slap in the face to some fans. They wondered, was he abandoning his message? Was this just about money? Could they trust him anymore? Ice-T later admitted that he understood the backlash. In interviews, he explained that he didn't take the role lightly, and he knew people would have something to say. But for him, It was never about supporting the police. It was about the story.
You know, Big Boy, I never really had a problem so much with the cops as people think, you know, even though I did cop killing and stuff like that, because we were real live criminals.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah.
We didn't hate the police were the opponent.
What many people don't know is that Ice-T himself wasn't even sure he could pull it off. He had never acted before. In fact, he didn't even consider himself an actor. At the time, he was still a rising rap star, known for his music and his street credibility, not his ability to deliver scripted lines on camera. In multiple interviews, Ice-T has said that when he first got the role, he thought it was a joke. He didn't believe Hollywood would actually take him seriously as an actor. But New Jack City director Mario Van Peebles saw something in him. He believed Ice-T had the authenticity to play Scotty Appleton because he had lived the life. Van Peebles wasn't looking for a polished Hollywood star. He wanted realness, someone who could bring an edge to the role that a traditional actor couldn't. And Ice-T had that. At first, Ice-T wasn't convinced. He even went as far as to tell Van Peebles, "I don't know how to act." But Van Peebles had a simple response: "Just be yourself." That was all Ice-T needed to hear. Despite all the doubts, both from himself and from fans, Ice-T's performance in New Jack City stunned everyone. He wasn't just decent, he was great. His portrayal of Scotty Appleton was intense, believable, and full of raw emotion. Whether it was his confrontations with Nino Brown or his emotional moments reflecting on the devastation drugs had caused in his community, Ice-T delivered a performance that felt real. For many, this was the moment they realized Ice-T could act. He wasn't just a rapper trying to cash in on a movie deal, he actually had talent. And in the years that followed, he proved that New Jack City wasn't just a one-time thing. His role led to more acting opportunities, eventually landing him his most famous gig, playing Detective Finn Tutuola on Law & Order, SVU, a role he's held for over 2 decades. The irony of Ice-T playing cops for most of his acting career isn't lost on him. He's often joked about it, saying that while he built his music career rapping about the streets, Hollywood kept casting him as law enforcement. But in reality, Ice-T has always played cops with an edge, characters who understand the streets and aren't afraid to challenge the system from within. One of the biggest criticisms New Jack City faced was its graphic portrayal of drug use and violence. The movie didn't hold back when showing the brutal reality of the crack epidemic. Scenes of cold-blooded murders, children being exposed to drugs, and addicts suffering the consequences of their addiction were front and center.
Enterprise, what the hell's an enterprise?
Man, what am I, your ghetto tour guide, man? What's wrong with you, man? Y'all got all this equipment in here and y'all don't know shit.
For some viewers, this was a wake-up call, a raw depiction of what was happening in many inner-city communities. But for others, it was too much. Critics worried that the film glamorized the drug trade, making it look like a fast track to power, money, and status. They argued that the stylish clothes, luxury cars, and extravagant lifestyle of Nino Brown could make the drug game seem appealing, especially to young viewers who might not fully understand the movie's deeper message. At the same time, some audience members were simply disturbed by the level of violence in the film. The infamous wedding murder scene where Nino kills his own best friend was particularly shocking, showing how ruthless and heartless the drug world could be. This led to debates about whether movies like New Jack City were too real for entertainment or necessary to expose harsh truths. Over the years, Hollywood has toyed with the idea of making a New Jack City sequel. Given the movie's legendary status, it's no surprise that studios have wanted to revisit the world of Nino Brown. But there's one person who wants no part of it: Wesley Snipes himself.
It got derailed because Wesley went and did Demolition Man.
Yeah.
He got $7 million for New Jack City. That was the full budget.
Right.
So he went up and today's price not the same.
During a conversation with Shadow and Act while promoting his movie Dolomite Is My Name, Snipes was asked about the New Jack City reboot. His response was firm: "I'm not associated with it, you know. I have nothing to do with it at all." That alone made it clear that Snipes had no interest in coming back to the world of New Jack City, but when pressed further, he explained his real issue with the reboot. I think some things should be left alone, if it worked at the time under the circumstances, and the story was built around things that are current. To Snipes, New Jack City was a product of its era. The film was heavily inspired by the real-life crack epidemic of the late 80s and early 90s, a time when drugs were tearing apart black communities. The movie captured that world in a way that felt authentic, partly because the problems it highlighted were very real at the time. But bringing it back now, Snipes doesn't see the point. One of Snipes' biggest concerns about a New Jack City sequel is how it would portray the drug trade in today's world. I don't particularly like the idea of recreating the drug culture. For what? I don't know. They actually talked to me about doing it, and I told them no. For Snipes, the idea of making another movie centered around drug dealers doesn't sit right. He's not interested in revisiting a world that, in his eyes, has already been explored enough. Back when New Jack City first hit theaters in 1991, it was meant to be a cautionary tale, showing the destruction that drugs could bring, not just to individuals, but to entire communities. However, Snipes understands that audiences don't always take away the intended message. Some people saw Nino Brown as a cool, stylish anti-hero rather than the villain the movie meant to portray. So if a sequel or reboot were made today, how would it be received? Would people see it as a warning, or would it glorify the very thing the original film tried to critique? Snipes isn't willing to take that risk. Another reason Snipes is so against the reboot is because he feels the story has already been told. To him, New Jack City was lightning in a bottle, a movie that worked perfectly for its time. It addressed the crack era, the rise of ruthless drug lords, and the government's complicity in allowing drugs to destroy black communities. The film made its mark, sparked conversations, and left behind a legacy. So why bring it back? Snipes doesn't see the need to retell a story that already made its point decades ago. New Jack City wasn't just another crime movie, it was a cultural moment. It put the crack epidemic on the big screen, exposing the destruction it caused. But in doing so, it also sparked debates that haven't died down to this day. Was New Jack City a bold warning, or did it accidentally make the drug game look too glamorous? Did it start an important conversation, or did it just add to the problem? One thing is certain. The impact of New Jack City didn't end when the credits rolled. The violence in theaters, the backlash, and the ongoing debates prove that this movie hit deeper than most. And decades later, we're still asking the same questions. Anyway, that's it for this video, folks. Bye.